Moinsen everyone and welcome to another new episode of the TJ Podcast. Running on every single day for 1000 consecutive days. Is streak running stupid or awesome? I have just completed a 1000-day running streak. That means that I have, without a single exception, gone for a run for that amount of consecutive days. My streak started on January 1st of 2022 and has so far kept going for a bit over 2.5 years. Now, on September 26th of 2024, the 1000-day mark has been reached. This has been my vague target for a while, although to answer one common question right up front, I don't plan on stopping. Why would anyone do that? This episode functions to answer many of the questions and addresses the doubts that some might have, but it also is a story about the things I've learned and experienced and the anecdotes and challenges I ran into along the way. No pun intended. 1000 days is a nice round number to have a bit of a reflection on it all, but this was much more about the journey as opposed to reaching that 1000-day target as the main motivation. I have been a keen runner for around 15 years now, but I think that the COVID pandemic definitely played a role in elevating this fun hobby into a personality-shaping lifestyle choice for me. During those socially isolated months in 2020, running and exercise had become even more important to me, and I've witnessed the same happening to many others in my circle. In 2021, I did my first huge mountain ultra trail race and really got into speed training for city marathons as well. It was the year I finally realized how great I felt on those days on which I took the time to run, and, maybe more importantly, how much worse I felt when I didn't. The advantages of running for exercise are abundant. It releases happiness hormones such as serotonin and endorphins. It's aiding in keeping nearly every major muscle group fit and healthy. The cardiovascular system is kept active and reduces the risk of several heart-related diseases. You automatically spend time outdoors and catch some vitamin D. It becomes very easy to reach that 10,000 steps per day target many people set for themselves. And you never ever come home after a run regretting it. The mood is always elevated afterwards, you can count on it. You've got something done, no matter how slow you were, you got out there and checked a box, especially so when the conditions weren't favorable. And although I didn't personally know anyone who was a streak runner at the time, it had been on my radar that some people do it. I started following a few on social media. They all seemed convinced and happy about the decision. None of those runners gave the impression that they were just fighting through it and actually didn't enjoy streak running. I'm aware that the people who dislike or disagree with streak running definitely exist, but you can't know until you try it yourself. I started my running streak to get another motivational boost to go out there every day because I learned that this will help me feel good. Explain the rules. What counts as a run? Who gets to say so? What if you cheat? Thankfully, there are people who have thought about this. This is the point where I introduce Ron Hill to you in case you haven't heard of him before. This man not only won Boston Marathon in 1970, was a two-time Olympic marathon runner, and became the second human ever to break the 2 hours and 10 minutes barrier on the distance. His achievements also include the longest streak of consecutive days run when he did it. He kept it going for 52 years and 39 days, from 1964 to 2017. He died aged 82 in 2021. Ron Hill defined a run as a run when it was at least 1 mile in length. That's 1.61 kilometers. As far as I'm aware, the first organized effort to unite streak runners was established in 2000 as United States Running Streak Association Incorporated and expanded globally in 2012 with the name Streak Runners International Incorporated. Both share the great domain name runeveryday.com and are using Hill's definition for what counts as a run as well. The speed of the run isn't important, although opinions differ on the intention of it. It should feel like a run. You shouldn't go at it planning it as a walk or hike. Of course, your running pace can be as slow as another person's hiking pace, but as long as you subjectively feel like you're running, that's fine. This leads us to the question, who checks this? Can you cheat? Nobody but yourself checks it, and if you cheat, you're just cheating yourself. Since there is nothing to be gained or won for anyone except for the elevated personal health and mood, there is absolutely no reason at all to cheat. You would need to be insane to cheat here. What counts as a day? What about time zones and the international dateline? This is where it gets tricky, but also where the nerdy fun begins, in my opinion. The sparsely formulated rules just state that a run has to happen on, quote, each calendar day, end of quote. And that sounds as clear as it needs to be. Of course, if you don't travel or just travel within your home time zone, you won't ever get into any predicaments. But when flying from Europe to the US or Asia, crossing many time zones in the process, you'll sometimes find your day cut dangerously short. Not only that, the calendar day of your place of departure and that of your destination can differ. How to navigate this and which calendar to use? My first thought was to take the UTC time zone as a base. This is fine as long as you're living in a time zone that's not too far away from UTC plus 0. I live in UTC plus 1 or UTC plus 2, depending on daylight saving. It would be very clean to log one run on each UTC calendar date. But if you live in New York City, for example, you're at UTC minus 4 or UTC minus 5, respectively, and the UTC calendar date change, midnight at UTC plus 0, would happen at 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. in your evening. So, for example, if you go for a run at 6 p.m. one day and then 9 p.m. the next, you would have unintentionally skipped a whole UTC date. So that's clearly not the solution either. If you'd like to keep your log as clean as possible, that is. What if you interpret it to mean a run on each calendar day where you just happen to be right then? That's a pragmatic solution until you go on a flight from Los Angeles to Sydney, for example. Crossing the date line in that direction will make you skip a whole calendar day, violating the rule. But if you go on a run right before that 14-hour flight and on another run right after, chances are high that according to the proposed UTC plus 0 idea, you'd still technically be in the clear. From what I've learned, this problem isn't solvable for streak runners in any other way than to avoid it and just fly the other way around the planet if you have to. I've heard from streak runners from the US who wanted to go to Australia and actually booked flights for the much longer route via Europe and Eastern Asia for that reason. Now that's true commitment. Although I personally once went on a flight from San Francisco to Auckland, crossing the international dateline in the same fashion and losing a full 24-hour day that way, it was before I started my streak. I haven't had the problem since, but I would certainly consider it if I were ever to face it again. For all the other tricky time zone situations, I would always make sure to run twice on that day just to be on the safe side. Here's where the 1 mile minimum comes in handy. So, when in doubt, run twice on the day in question and avoid crossing the international dateline in the western direction. During the 1000 days, I ran into somewhat difficult travel situations just twice, and both involved traveling back from the US to Europe and losing many hours to time zone crossings. In the summer of 2022, I spent a few days on the East Coast, but my trip back to Europe was crazy. I spent the last night in Baltimore attending a rock concert, had to take a very early morning Amtrak to Penn Station, NYC, then fly from LaGuardia to Chicago O'Hare before going straight into an overnight flight to Paris, France, followed by a connection to Munich, where I wanted to run an ultramarathon the next morning. The only safe option I saw was to get up at 4:30 in the morning and run for a quarter of an hour through nightly Baltimore, still half asleep and with my ears ringing from the massive guitar riffs of last night, so I could catch my train and not mess up that fragile plan. My next run was in Munich, terribly jet-lagged at 4:30 p.m. The UTC +1 rule was not violated. Without that very early Baltimore run, it would have been the end, though. The other slightly tricky travel occasion happened when coming back from running Boston Marathon in April of 2023. Right after the race, I had to get going to catch my overnight flight back, again via Paris. The connection to Hamburg was delayed by a lot, and I didn't want to risk leaving the airport while waiting. Solution? Laps inside Charles de Gaulle Terminal F. It wasn't the worst, actually. People weren't agitated. Some were looking, but most just went on with their plans. Of course, there's no GPS signal inside buildings like these huge international airports, but the accelerometers in my watch came up with a quite good estimate of the distance I covered in about 20 minutes of running inside of it. And when I finally arrived in Hamburg close to midnight, I was really glad that I did that safety jog inside Paris's biggest airport in the afternoon. What if you get sick or injured? And won't your knees be destroyed after a few months? There are no excuses. If you fail to run on a single day for whatever reason, you're out. The point is to go outside to run in all and every of the conditions. My 1000th run was a rainy and windy fall day. Doesn't matter. Of course, this means that you need to be careful with your body. Going out as hard as you possibly can each day won't get you far. And although it has been done by some people, you should probably think twice if running on a freshly broken leg or while suffering from a serious heart condition really is that smart and outweighs the gain felt by continuing the streak. Legend has it that Ron Hill had some serious surgery during his 52 years of streak running once, but still managed a mile on crutches the next day and fully recovered. Making sane decisions is something every person should aim for, regardless of streak running. It's a thin line sometimes. That being said, my personal feeling is that too many people are too quick to find excuses. A little sneeze, feeling slightly tired today, most jump to use that to justify staying home on the couch watching Netflix instead of running. I have certainly done the same before, but I realized that this kind of behavior isn't helping me. On the contrary, it's destructive. There is no harm done when you've caught a little cold, but still go out for a short and easy run. It often even helps. I had a few colds during the time. My 4 daughters collect a bunch of germs in school, but none brought me down, fortunately. As most others, I also caught COVID. The first time was very strange and happened during a focused training block, but I didn't have to stay in bed. I remember 2 or 3 runs feeling really weak and coughing, but that was over within less than a week. After all the vaccinations, I caught COVID 2 more times, and both times it wasn't a problem at all. Slightly under the weather, shorter, easy runs to be safe. A few days later, everything was fine. Proper injuries can be tough to circumnavigate during a streak run, though. I've had the questionable pleasure of finding that one out myself, when in May of 2022, I clumsily dropped a bottle of my favorite non-alcoholic Erdinger Weissbier onto one of my smaller toes, squishing and breaking the bones of it in the process. This sucked, and the pain and inflammation definitely made it impossible for me to really run on the next days. So I hiked around the block instead, starting with 2 kilometers and increasing the distance over the day, continuing the streak. The slow pace had to stay the same for a while. Almost exactly 2 weeks after the incident, I overcame the pain threshold and, surprising myself, fell into a running motion again. The toe was mostly healed. I was so happy that day. Other than that, I was lucky not to break any more bones or catch serious illnesses during the period. Yet throughout this journey, a question lingered in the back of my mind. Isn't streak running bad for your body? Most probably not, but it depends on how exactly you're doing it. If you're running in minimal shoes without any practice and keep heel striking for hours each day, your knees and other body parts will most probably say goodbye fairly soon. This is an extreme example, of course, but there are a bunch of widely practiced unhealthy ways of running which can actually do harm. This is a separate topic, though. As long as you've got proper shoes, not the worst technique, and keep most of your runs at an easy and relaxed pace, you're absolutely fine running every day for decades, injury-free. Ron Hill and many others have proved it. I'm not a robot who is immune to any kind of running-induced pain either. There are a few niggles here and there from time to time, but I felt that a relaxed and short run was helping to aid those and not delay the time to fully heal. Our amazing bodies are always in motion internally, and I am quite sure that no single body ever is 100% healthy. It's okay, we are built for this. We are certainly not improving our health by always waiting and not exercising, that's for sure. But what about my training plan? My understanding is that taking no rest days is bad. This is something I've had to experiment with. There are good arguments for both sides. First, if you take a look at proper professional runners, almost all of them run on every single day. Not as a challenge or to keep their running streaks alive, but because this is the optimal way of improving their fitness levels. They observe seasonal breaks, though. And there are definitely days where they intentionally reduce their training run to something that is aiding their recovery, shorter and more slowly. But don't forget, those are the professionals. In the end, it is a matter of your own lifestyle. If you cycle to work every day or have some stairs to climb in the office building or at home, you too are active for probably at least a quarter of an hour per day. That's equivalent to that 1 mile minimum run, meaning there's a place for it and it won't mess with your activity limits. It differs individually, but for me I have found out that a run of less than 5 kilometers distance won't tire me out at all. This is a recovery run for me. Of the 1,000 days, I've run for less than 5 kilometers exactly 138 times. And 64 runs were shorter than 3 kilometers. I did only one run that was shorter than 2, with 1.65 kilometers and therefore just barely longer than the 1.61 kilometer minimum. That was June 15th of 2024, 3 hours after my 105 kilometer Zugspitz Ultra Trail finish. But since on that day I additionally spent about 17 hours running before that short run, I don't think it really counts as my shortest distance run on any of the 1,000 days. I believe I can rightfully state that my shortest daily run was over 2 kilometers. Those 64 very short runs reflect quite well the number of days when I've really felt tired or might have had another sort of problem. I've got a few more of those curiosities coming up for you. What exactly constitutes a rest day for me, I've had to figure out first, though. For a while, I never ran less than 5 kilometers, But that seemed to mess with the hard training cycle I was in at the time. When I reduced those distances, my speed increased. The power of polarization. In the end, these 1000 days of running every day got me to my fittest ever self. I've beaten countless personal bests in this time frame, achieved other results I'm really proud of, such as the mentioned Zugspitz Ultra finish, have gotten sick less often, and felt more fit and healthy than ever before. If done right, running every day can actually aid your training, but you need to figure out your own personal limits. What about the day after a huge run like an ultra trail race? Like stated above, my shortest run of the 1000 was because it had to happen just a few hours after I had finished an ultra trail race of 105 kilometers length, with more than 5,000 meters of elevation gain. That race took me 19 hours to finish. It started in the evening at 10:15 p.m., so technically that race just counted as a run for that date. And when I crossed that finish line at 5:15 p.m. the next day, I already knew that I would want to do another run, so I have the rules definitely covered. Call me stupid if you like. Needless to say, that 1.65 kilometer run required a mountain of willpower. But that's all. Running on super tired mountain ultra legs is highly uncomfortable, but it won't destroy anything. Just push through, it'll be fine again a few days later. Exactly 50 of my runs were of marathon distance or longer, so I had at least 50 slow recovery runs the days after. Apart from that post-Zugspitz mile, I had one other race of similar difficulty requiring me to get creative to keep the streak alive, at least to my own high standards. That was the 120 kilometer long Lavaredo Ultra Trail in June of 2023. I've detailed the problem and my solution in that blog post on the race, but here's the gist. Since that race started at 11 p.m., just an hour before midnight, and I realized in the afternoon, many hours into the race, that I won't make it to the finish line before the next midnight would arrive, I actually ended up having a single run spanning 3 different calendar days. Crazy, right? My finishing time was 25 hours and 30 minutes. I finished at 30 minutes past midnight. I knew this could happen, so I did what I outlined above. Additional safety runs. On the day of the evening start, I did an easy 2K at around noon. It helped me relax the muscles before the long race. Then, the next day, while running through those Italian mountains, I took out my phone and logged a 2-kilometer section of the route in addition to my GPS watch, which was tracking the whole race. I did this just to have a separate activity in my log which started on that calendar day, because otherwise, in the overview, that day would have been empty, and I would not like that. After finishing the full race, I fell into my bed. The next morning, I traveled back home and did a super slow 2-kilometer run in the evening, although technically I had already been running for about half an hour of this calendar date. This way, I felt like I was absolutely in the clear. No gray areas. The only thing that was bugging me was that I logged 2 kilometers of the race twice, inflating my total distance count. To offset this, I ran for 2 unlogged kilometers a few days later. Checkbox ticked, perfect, all clean. Sure, you're going to be tired some days, and it also might get tricky to continue. But those days when you have to get creative or summon up lots of willpower are what makes streak running so fun. Don't you ever get bored or feel tired of running every day? You would think that on days like those right after a big race, I might have questioned my life choices. And I wouldn't have been surprised myself if that would have happened. But it didn't. Not yet, at least. I think a couple of times I said to myself that I'll quit once I've done 365 days, or even these 1000 days, but those were short-lived thoughts. Sure, there were days when I could have done without a run, but my motto from before remained true: you never ever regret having done a run. Once you've come home from that little jog, even if it's the shortest possible one, there's this positive feeling setting in, of having completed something good. Honestly, I really have to think hard to remember a phase during which I was so tired or bored or annoyed by the challenge that I was about to quit. Some people say that something you do every day for about a month becomes a habit. Afterwards, you don't question it anymore. You don't have to make the decision to do it over and over again. It just becomes a given. And that had happened to me quickly. What was new was that now I think the challenge has really become part of my personality. I started to identify as a streak runner. It's not my main trait, but it certainly is very important to me. I first noticed this when my friend Matthias coached me on my way to the sub 3-hour marathon. Since I had failed reaching that time goal before, he was looking for causes, and we landed on a few discussions about taking rest days more seriously. He was quite convinced that my streak running hurt my goal. I wasn't so sure. We landed on a compromise. I reduced my weekly short and slow runs to even shorter and slower ones. Unfortunately, we couldn't settle who was right because that training effort didn't work out for unrelated reasons. But I realized during those discussions that the streak running really had become a non-negotiable for me. I wasn't going to give it up for some other goal. Or if I was, that other goal would have to be just incredibly cool. When running every day becomes part of who you are, it's hard to get bored and tired of it. There was one other occasion where I was questioning if a run would be a good idea and was prepared to let the streak end. It was the day my father-in-law Peter died, about 2 years ago. He was 75 years old and had suffered from ALS for 2.5 years. Finally, his suffering was over. He died at night. Right in the next morning, we all went over to my in-laws' home and spent the day together to mourn him. Over the course of the day, many people showed up and paid their respects. It was beautiful to hear all these stories, hug each other a lot, and celebrate Peter's life in a way. It was intense and there wasn't a break. At one point in the late afternoon, I excused myself for 10 minutes, went outside the house wearing my normal clothing, and just ran for 5 minutes down the street, turned and ran back. It helped. I think I needed it. It fit right in and I didn't feel like it was insensitive. My main job was supporting my wife and mother-in-law, but at that time I finally had room to breathe and mourn Peter myself for a short while. He was a great father-in-law. A few weeks later I did a commemorative ultra run with 1 kilometer for each of his life's years and wrote a blog post about him and that run. What other difficulties could have come up? As stupid as it sounds, a high number of streak runs end because the runner just plainly forgot to run one day. That is funny and sad at the same time. It is also my biggest fear because it can happen so easily and to anyone. There are many days in my life with 4 kids where everything is crazy and chaotic from start to finish, and just getting through the day becomes a challenge. Phases with sick kids are tough to navigate too. Travel days especially so, and a combination of both is the worst. This is why I try to run early in the day. If I happen to know beforehand if it's going to be one of those tricky days, I will set a real early alarm clock to get my run in before anyone wakes up. If it's done, I can't forget. There were at least a handful of days during these 1000 where at some point in the afternoon I realized I hadn't yet run and got immediately anxious. Where and when would I get the next chance to do so? Once that thought had entered my brain, it wasn't going away though. So far, I didn't simply forget to run one day, and I hope that forgetting it won't be the way my streak ends one day, whenever that day might be. Why else do running streaks end? Most often injuries related to running or not, or serious illnesses. I entered Streak Runners International Incorporated on the first day I became eligible, 365 days into the streak. They require a small annual fee and in turn maintain the project and send out a quarterly newsletter that's as long as a book. The current edition is a 96-page PDF file. In this newsletter, called the Streak Registry, people who have active streaks going on get a chance to say a few words about their experiences, celebrate a recently achieved anniversary, such as reaching a 10-year-long streak, and publish stories about unusual races and portraits of some special people in the community. A large part of the PDF is always a long list of names. People who have active streaks going and those who retired their streaks. But the saddest part is when people say a few words about what caused them to retire their often long-going streaks. Broke my arm, general health issues, open heart surgery, torn meniscus, broke my radius and ulna, received a pacemaker via surgery after 38 years of streak running are among the reasons cited. It makes you realize that a lot of luck has to be involved when you want to make it far. It seems rare that people state the cause to be a voluntary one. What is the streak running community like? From what I've witnessed, it's a highly inclusive and supportive community. People are trying to lift each other up and don't get competitive. It wouldn't make much sense to get competitive either, because the only thing you can do to advance your own status is by continuing to run every day. Everything else is out of your hands. Streak Runners International keeps updated lists of all streaks, ongoing or retired. In the global ranking, I'm currently placing 4,054th of all active streaks and 2,737th of all active streaks by men. The percentage of women is quite high here, as you can see. I am sharing that position with 57 other people because I chose the commonly selected January 1st to begin. The only way to move up is if others in front of me end their streaks. I don't want that to happen. The contrary, I would like that more people discover for themselves that streak running is a fun thing to do. Just in Germany, by the way, I'm now in 66th position of all active runners. When I entered the list in the beginning of 2023, I was 69th and last. 3 runners who were ahead of me apparently quit in the meantime. Now there are 92 people on the list, which makes me happy. A lot more people joined than quit. I have met a few streak runners along the way, but that happened more or less by accident. There are no organized events as far as I'm aware. One of my buddies is Guy Almog from Munich, who is just about to break 5 years. He's not just streak running, he also does crazy mileage. With very few exceptions, he runs a half marathon every single day, and not slowly. He's also very positive about it and doesn't seem like he's about to quit anytime soon. There's a beautiful video about him reaching his 1000th consecutive run, made by Hoka. The video is linked in the description here. He says lots of great things during the video which apply to me just the same. It's about having found the intrinsic motivation to run every day, about sorting your priorities, how running alone and running in groups is both enjoyable, and how to discern between goals and milestones. His main statement is that as long as it's fun to him and he enjoys it, he'll keep going. That's how I feel about it too, and it ties directly into what I've said before. Even on those days when you don't feel like a run, jumping over your own shadow and doing that short lap around the block despite it all will make you feel better. It might not seem like fun at first on some days, but it is. Another person who radiates positivity surrounding streak running is a man called Hella Sidibe. Originally from Mali, he used to play soccer professionally here in Germany before moving to the US and starting to run. He's now at over 7 years of streak running and has done crazy things during it as well. Those include becoming the first African American to complete a transcontinental run in the USA. It took him just 84 days. And finishing several trail ultras, including the Western States 100. He has this huge trademark smile and always starts his videos by saying, "What's up, my beautiful people?" There's your daily dose of inspiration. He appeared in an episode of the Everyday Ultra podcast and talked a lot more about motivation and related topics. The link is also in the description here. While streak running is an individual challenge, it's an uplifting community of positivity and inspiration, and it feels good to be part of it. One question remains: what's next? During the past 1000 days, I very much made it up as I went along. In my blog post about what I intended to do in 2022, when I started this streak, I stated that I was about to run every day just for the month of January. Well, that escalated quickly. After January, I just kept going with the idea to keep doing it for as long as it's fun. In March, I thought it would be cool to reach 100 days. In early summer, I was so invested that I made it through those 2 weeks with a broken toe, and later that year, I was already convinced it would be cool to keep going once the first full year is done. When that happened, I happily stated that I just entered the Streak Runners International community when I became eligible and intended to keep it open-ended. The next meaningful milestone is this one: 1,000 consecutive days. It sometimes crossed my mind to stop when I reached that point, but over these past 32.8 months, that thought never manifested into a plan. My plan is to keep it going for as long as it's fun, and it's looking like that will be a while. The next fun milestone is called Gump Day, after the title character in the Forrest Gump movie, who just one day decided to go for a run and kept crossing the United States many times until he decided it was time to go home. According to the movie, that fictional streak went on for 3 years, 2 months, 14 days, and 16 hours. By the way, he only averaged 91 miles, or 146 kilometers, per week. About a half marathon each day, just like my friend Guy. For me, Gump Day will happen on March 15th of 2025. But I'll probably not cross the US 5 times like Rob Pope did in honor of the movie a few years back. Maybe once, though. The annual anniversaries will for me be all on New Year's Day, so it won't be very significant. Round numbers of days, such as 2,000, 5,000, or 10,000, are far into the future. Those 3 will happen on the 24th of June 2027, the 10th of September 2035, and the 19th of May 2049, respectively. I'll be 42, 51, and 64 years old. In case my future me listens to this episode at those dates, way to go, well done. And in order to beat legendary Ron Hill, I'd have to keep going until February 10th of 2074. On that day, I would be 89 years of age. Now, that would be truly remarkable. As of right now, there are 3 other runners with active streaks who have surpassed him, though. The leader is 74-year-old John Sutherland with 20,213 days. That's over 55 years. If John stopped today, I would need to keep going until I'm 92. But those are just fun numbers to play around with. Now, some more fun numbers. The statistics. On these past 1,000 days, I did 1,012 runs. Some days I ran more than once. The average distance has been 12.35 kilometers. That's 7.67 miles. I spent 1,154 hours running. My average pace over all runs was 5 minutes and 32 seconds per kilometer, which is 8 minutes and 54 seconds per mile. The total distance covered running during these 1,000 days was 12,501 kilometers, which is 7,767 miles. 50 runs were of marathon distance or longer. That's 42.2 kilometers or 26.2 miles. 26 pure running races, not including the runs on triathlons, of which there were 6. 138 runs of less than a 5K. 101 runs less than 4K. 64 runs less than 3K. And 1 single run of less than 2 kilometers length, although debatable, see above. 498 runs were longer than a 10K, so close to 50%. My 5 longest runs in descending order were the Lavaredo Ultra Trail at 120 kilometers, the Zugspitz Ultra Trail at 105 kilometers, the 4th Munich Breweries Ultra at 80.5 kilometers, the 75 kilometer Fehmarn-Umrundung fastest known time, and the 61 kilometer Schweriner Seentrail race. That's all I could come up with. But it's of course just for the heck of it. The main thing to take away from my experience running for 1,000 days in a row is that I found it to be highly enjoyable and plan to keep going indefinitely. And if this little story here has inspired you to give it a go yourself, be it for a week or a month, please do. If more people were running, I think the world would be a better place. Running removes anger and adds positive feelings. That's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If so, please share it with a friend or give it a good review on the platform you're listening on. Thanks for your attention and all the best to you. Have a great day. Bye bye.